Friends, would you like to hear a story? I know it's late in the day. I was hoping for a little bit more enthusiasm. I'm just going to try one more time. Would you like to hear a story? Yeah! Awesome. That's perfect, because I have a story I'd love to tell all of you. It's a special story, so in order to tell it, I have to invite you for a quick trip on my time machine, because we're headed back to 18th century London. Now, if we as modern human beings traveled back in time, stepped out of the time machine, and went for a stroll along the River Thames, many things would look different to our modern eyes. There's one thing in particular that would probably stand out. That's the fact that you would see sets of bellows, just like these, hanging all along the river on the embankment. And they were there to serve a very serious and particular medical purpose. Now, just in case this sounds a bit odd, hang on, I'll give you the explanation, but it's going to get really weird. In the 18th century, it was mainstream medical fact that tobacco smoke was very healthy for you. It was thought to stimulate the whole system. In particular, it was a huge benefit to important internal organs like the heart and lungs. Very good for the heart and lungs. And so the doctors, they were crazy about this miracle treatment, and they used it against a long series of ailments. And it was thought that the most effective way of administering this miracle cure was by use of an enema. Yes, a tobacco smoke enema. And I'm not making this up. You can check it on Google. Don't do it now. We need attention here. Check it on Google afterwards. There's a lot of evidence to back this up. I'm not making it up. Among other things, this image here, which shows two young hip people getting ready for a health booster treatment. So the doctors, they were crazy about this, and it sounds bizarre to us, but it became really, really popular. Like tobacco smoke enemas just took off and became a trend in health and wellness. So the doctors were really excited, and they were looking for new applications of this incredible new technology here. And so one day they heard a story, or a case study, if you will, that made them really excited. Apparently, someone had used a tobacco smoke enema to damn it, that was a really bad mess up. To successfully, I didn't mean the other way, I was not trying to say that. Was that a Freudian slip? Anyways, they were, recovery. They, I completely lost track there. Sorry, gotta find my way back. Where were we? Yeah, so there are these people here, and okay, yes. So they were looking for new applications, and they heard this story that made them really excited. You can call it a case study if you will. Apparently, someone had used a tobacco smoke enema to successfully revive a drowning victim. A person believed to be dead from drowning. Yeah, right? So I'm not going to try to claim I'm a doctor or anything fancy, because I'm not. But I'm a little bit skeptical of the case study here. I have questions. And never mind the science, let's just park that. It's like, I just want to know, kind of like, how did this go down in the first place? Like, who comes up with an idea like that, let alone does it? That's out-of-the-box thinking. Like, panicking on the riverbank, you have a body there, like, what should we do first? Mouth to mouth? No, wait. I have a much better idea. Hand me that pipe. Also, another question, was the person dead? And if not, is it not a very reasonable reaction to spring to life if someone surprises you with an enema? So, unfortunately, the doctors back then didn't really ask critical questions like this. They were just really relieved that they found a solution to a huge problem. And it was just confirmed what they already believed. They were like, what more evidence could you need? This stuff works. And so they set into production the first emergency tobacco smoke enema kits, right? And so the first prototypes had some usability issues. But through design and innovation, they came up with a bellows system. So from a safe distance, you could administer the treatment. So now you know why there were bellows hanging along the river. And thank you! That was all I had for you. No, of course not. Of course not. No, there's a reason why I'm telling you this story, not just because I love it. It's very relevant to to the topic here. Very relevant, because it's something that happens a lot to human beings, especially in the role as researcher. When we find what we were looking for, the perfect solution, and it's completely aligned with what we already believe, we have a tendency to stop looking for information and instead all we really see is confirmation that we were right. This is what psychologists and scientists call confirmation bias. According to modern psychology, this is one of the most pervasive and detrimental of the biases we human beings have. It's expressed like this: as a tendency for us to search and recall information in ways that confirm our existing beliefs, hypotheses, and expectations, to accept evidence we agree with at face value, and to reject, dismiss information we do not agree with unless the evidence is overwhelming. We saw all three things in the story I told you. And it's very easy to laugh at that story. It's almost cute, like that they thought tobacco was really healthy for you, right? And we've learned a lot. We know that's not the case now, but confirmation bias is still very much alive and kicking, and it plays a huge role in the way we make decisions. The legendary investor Warren Buffett once said, what the human being is best at is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact. He's talking about confirmation bias, and he said this when he was explaining what he saw as the biggest mistake in investment. And that was the fact that once people had decided it was a good decision to invest, they couldn't stray from that. It's too painful to realize you made the wrong decision. So obviously that leads to a lot of bad investments and decisions. So the problem is not interested in information, we just want confirmation. It feels really good. So it's been around for a long time, obviously. But I would argue that there are elements in modern society that intensify the effects of confirmation bias. The internet is a good example. You don't really have to spend much time on Google to find confirmation for basically anything you want. Facebook, that's a confirmation bias machine if I ever saw one. You can completely fine-tune your world in there. So if there's someone you find particularly annoying, sick of listening to them all the time, and you don't agree with them, you can block them. They're gone. Stuff you don't want to see in your stream. It even says, see fewer posts like this. And in time, you'll have a perfect little confirmation bias bubble where you only let opinions in that you agree with, and you swiftly crush opposing opinions before they pose a threat to your perfect little world. So there are some advantages. There are advantages to all our cognitive biases. You can call them mental shortcuts. The brain tries to conserve energy in any way it can. It's really, really a lot of work going on up here, especially if it's analytical work. So anything the brain can automate for us will help us conserve energy. And it's a huge advantage, because if we had to analyze everything all the time, we'd just be paralyzed. We'd never get anything done. We'd just be computing. So there is an advantage. However, confirmation bias, well, it also, just to add, it also helps us form tribes. It helps us cooperate. So evolutionary psychologists would argue that that's why it came about. But it does limit our capacity for objective analysis. And that's a huge threat to any discipline that seeks to uncover the truth. Science and marketing are exceptionally good examples. And I would argue that as we, as marketers, are trying to become more scientific and use more data, we have to understand some of the stuff that scientists do. Scientists are very, very acutely aware of confirmation bias. You could argue that the scientific method is there only to counter the detrimental effects of confirmation bias. So it makes sense that us, as marketers, we need to understand the same things. We have to be aware of this. We have to understand how to avoid it if we want to become better marketers, if we want to actually understand the truth about what we're trying to do. So in the rest of the talk, I'll go through 2 confirmation bias pitfalls that are very common and dangerous for marketers. And the world is going to look awful. And then we're going to make the world look really good, because we're going to talk about how to overcome them. So I would not try to claim, that would be naive, that you can completely overcome them. You can't. But you can work with them. You can get a long way. So let's look at the first pitfall, torturing data. I love this quote. If you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. And yeah, it's always interesting to get the first reactions, probably data people, because I think anyone who's, right? Spend a little bit of time with data, and you're like, wow, this is a powerful thing I got here, especially if the other people don't understand analytics. And the bigger the data set, and not just fooling other people, it's very easy to fool yourself as well. So the bigger the data set, the bigger the problem, the bigger the likelihood of finding things that look like they have a correlation or an effect, a causation. Here's an example of a very large data set, a whole decade. high correlation, 93%, between two data sets. Let's have a look at them. So the first one is per capita consumption of mozzarella cheese in the United States. And it correlates, 93% correlation with, the number of people who died becoming tangled in their bed sheets. So let's say I'm a cheese marketer. I market Swiss cheese, and mozzarella is my biggest competitor, right? Great data. It's just super dangerous to eat mozzarella, right? It gets worse. 95 correlation between mozzarella cheese consumption and the people who died by falling down the stairs. It's horrible. It's super dangerous. Like even drowning in natural water, like not swimming pools, natural water only, we're very specific here. I could even flip it around and say by switching to Swiss cheese, you would have a higher likelihood of surviving because there's only a 40% correlation. So obviously, it's an extreme example, but I think you can probably think back to examples where you've seen something in the data that's really, really good and supports what you think. And maybe you didn't really think to then go, it's probably not true. Let's dig deeper. So this is an extreme example, obviously. But correlation does not equal causation. I think this bears repeating. It's kind of a cliche, but it's important to remember. So there's one particular form of data. It's very, very easy to torture. I actually just have to tickle it just a little bit, and it'll confess. We all use it, web analytics data. So let's have a look. So we have an important campaign for an important client. And the goal was to get the conversion rate up to at least 7%. So close. It's almost unbearable. So close. 6.65 conversion rate here. What's that based on, actually? Let's have a look here. So sessions, 9,393 sessions and 625 leads. Oh, what's that? Users, they're less. Oh, yeah, of course. So what if I based my conversion rate on users? Woo! I got it. I way overperformed. So next time we're going to use the right metric, because this is clearly the right metric for us. Until it doesn't work, then we'll find another metric. That'll show us what we want. So this is pretty common. It's very, very tempting. And I think sometimes we have a little bit of a naive idea about how research works. Like, for me, anyways, I often think of it like this. Very easy. I read research. I get new insight. Awesome. The world is different. And I've learned something. Well, confirmation bias would say it's a little bit more complicated because of the confirmation bias cycle. See, the steps are, there's a few extra steps here. I'll go through them with you. So I read the research. I have to decide if I agree with it or not. If I agree with it, that's when confirmation bias kicks in. So then all I have to do is ignore any flaws in the research and keep my worldview. Woo! Just the way I like it. I could also not agree with it. Confirmation bias kicks in. I have to find a reason the research is flawed. Then I can ignore the research and keep my worldview. Yay! Everything is intact just the way I want it to be. So you might go, Michael, what about split testing? Isn't that a perfect way to avoid this stuff? I say, yes, in principle, if you're doing it right. It's a big if. I don't mean to offend anyone. I'm sorry if you do. I don't mean to be arrogant. But in the 10 years I've been doing this, like I've done it wrong a lot. I've learned along the way. But I see many, many marketers. Let me put it differently. I see very few marketers doing A/B testing right. Okay? So this is a typical thing. And it's really, really tempting to succumb to your confirmation bias here. You see this lift? That's incredible, right? You get really excited. And the lift is so huge, it can't be by coincidence. Pop the champagne, call the client, post the blog post, tell the world. So if you had let this one run longer for its full duration, it would have tanked. It would have underperformed. So that's not good for anyone, especially not the client who thought they got a 200% lift. It's not good if we published that case study either, because in fact, the opposite was the case, and we thought we had science to back it up. So now we start sharing it. People get excited. I'm going to do that on my website, and all of a sudden we have a best practice that is based on nothing. It's really dangerous. So therefore, it makes sense to figure out how long you have to run your test, for example, before. So here's a typical example. I'm going to give you a calculator afterwards. I'll just show you the calculation. Typical example, you have a 2% conversion rate. You're trying to see a 10% lift. You want a significance level of 95%. You need a sample of 156,800 users. You get 50 a day. Let's look at the test duration. Oh, only 8.5 years. So now you know that. Then you can make a business decision to say, no, I don't care that I actually had to run it 8.5 years. After the first day, I'm convinced that I'm going to stop it. That's a business decision. That's your decision. That's fine. You can always do that. Just, it's dangerous when we fool ourselves into thinking that it was backed by science or stats, because it wasn't. There are tons of them out there you can try. The one I built, and you just plug in your numbers there, and then it'll give you a good idea of what to expect. And you can mess around with the numbers and get a little bit of experience with it. So you can try to change the conversion rate. What if we had a higher conversion rate? What if we had a bigger sample? What if we had more traffic each day? And get a feeling for how this works. This has helped me enormously in my work, and I do it every single time. So, for example, if you could pull off a lift of 60, or you have to have a lift of 60% to be able to pull it off within a month, well, then you know we're not just going to change one word in the copy. That's not going to have enough effect. We have to do something radical. So now you're informed. Can you torture qualitative data? Oh, yeah. It's almost easier. You know, you're interviewing your customers and stuff, and you're excited. And you go like, wouldn't you agree that this is a useful feature? Or, can you tell us why you love our product? So we're not really looking for information here. We're trying to elicit confirmation. Really dangerous. Okay, I'll just summarize this pitfall here really quick. Torturing data is a very dangerous pitfall for marketers. It plays on our natural tendency to look for confirmation. It's sneaky. It happens without us knowing it. The second pitfall I call using marketers' logic. Confirmation bias is also known as my-side bias because you have a tendency to see the world from your perspective and your perspective only, which makes things well, it simplifies life, but it also gets frustrating because it's really hard to understand other people. For example, your customers. It's kind of like this virtual reality filter, really, where the real world is out here, but you're filtering through your own biases, and then you have this different worldview here. But if you want to influence people, it makes sense that you remove that filter. I'll show you a really good example. I was keynoting at a higher learning conference, and I got some landing pages to critique. I was critiquing this one, and the first thing I see is the stock photo woman here. Such a sin to use stock photo. Oh, no. And I was going to illustrate it, so I said, just do a Google search. Like, oh, you'll find her in Shutterstock. But not only that, apart from being a student enrolling at a college, she's also been an architect. She's been a gym doctor. She's been a family doctor. She's been an animal doctor. She's been a very happy hairstylist. She's been a nail stylist. She's been a photographer. She's been an air hostess. She's been a very successful businesswoman winning. And she's been a super happy tennis coach, too. And now, obviously, she needs another education because the other ones were not enough. So to illustrate the point and to prove I was right, to confirm I was right, and that I'm an ingenious marketer, I ran what's known as a 5-second test. So you show to your panel something for 5 seconds, for example this, and then you ask them questions, and they have to answer based on what they recall from those 5 seconds. 5 seconds is just about our attention spans. It's a really interesting way of figuring out what people take away intuitively from your pages. There's different ways you can do this. Usability Hub, for example. So I asked them the question, what do you think this page was about, and did the landing page seem trustworthy? And I knew what was going to happen, but it didn't. 88% had no problem, or could say absolutely what this page was about. That's unusual in these kinds of tests. That's a lot. And some of them even completely nailed it. Oh, it's Ohio Christian University, and you can complete your degree in 2 years. Like the amount of details they caught were staggering. And also, 80% had no problem with them. Yep, it's trustworthy. So maybe, just maybe, the target audience here does not spend hundreds of hours scouring the internet for horrible stock photo sinners like I do. Maybe that's not something they worry about. Still want to prove I'm right, though, so I did another test. I found something that I thought was way more trustworthy, and I said, okay, so which of these do you find most trustworthy? Damn! They're not confirming I'm right. So if this was a client, and I had suggested we have to go and spend a lot of money taking photos of real people and stuff, that would not have been a good investment for them, and I would have given them really, really bad advice, to be honest. I would not have helped them at all. Also, as marketers, from our perspective, we discuss stuff like above and below the fold. We'll discuss it passionately. We'll get into fistfights almost. I've had a lot of these discussions. To me, it's... Like the best exclamation I've gotten is a lot of people gravitate towards over the fold. It's not a bad thing at all. But the best argument for it I found when I asked people is, well, that's where most people will see it. I'm like, wow. I didn't know it was that easy. Thank you. I thought there were decision-making processes and complicated products and all this stuff. Cool, well, you nailed it. So that's not the case. I've seen both work. It's really highly dependent on context. That's why you need to do some research. Here's an example where this is the first test I ran for Unbounce. They had these very, very, like, content slim, short landing pages with a CTA right above the bold, buy it now. And so my variation was a very, very long landing page with the CTA buried at the bottom. So obviously this was not the only change. I'm just saying this version, it was hard to get to the CTA. With it, we saw some pretty powerful lifts. We had ran the test for a full month, 577 conversions, high significance level. Some pretty good results there. So now I want to make it extremely clear to you that I'm not saying this is a new best practice. I'm not saying under the fold is always better. The reason why I'm being so adamant about it is because I've done this talk once before. I showed this case study. The first thing that that happened was someone was live tweeting, Michael Aagaard has done extensive research to prove that under the fold is always best. And then another guy jumps in and said, I knew it. I knew it was true. I've always said that. And then the people who believe in over the fold jump in, and they go, no! And they say, I want to see the data, and who is this, and who is that, and target, blah, 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 stuff like that. So I'm all of a sudden spending like hours on Twitter going, no, I didn't say that. I was misquoted. It was the exact opposite thing I meant. So that, to me, is such a beautiful example of seeing and hearing exactly what you want to. Confirmation bias. So that's why I'm making it clear this is not a new best practice. It depends on the context. So it can lead to this kind of I'm wrong, you're right attitude. You know, I'm smart, you're stupid. That's not constructive when you're working with clients. It's not at all constructive in life, I'd say. It's not a very, open way of inviting in new information. Let's summarize. Using marketers' logic is a dangerous pitfall. It plays on a natural tendency to assume that we're right. It's very sneaky, and it happens without us knowing it. Okay. So at this point, I hope I've introduced some new thoughts, and maybe you're thinking differently about a couple of things. Maybe you're even like maybe you think I'm a nasty guy. Like last time I got speaker reviews here, most people were like, that's awesome. And there were a couple who were like, you're wrong, no. How dare you say these things? So it'll be interesting to see the comments after this one. But let's get into making the world better by looking at how we can overcome confirmation bias. So I would not be naive enough to suggest that we can completely overcome it. That would be silly. I don't believe that. But we can do a lot to counter it. Step one is accepting the fact that you could be wrong. So this one seems easy, but it can be really, really hard. I think especially for marketers, because we're under a lot of pressure. We have to be right. We have to hit targets. We have to satisfy clients. We want to get paid. We don't feel really good about being wrong. So kind of understand how big of a problem it was. I sent out a survey to 100 online marketers, and they didn't know what it was. I just said, please fill out the survey. And then I primed them with this. Actually, could you take part in this? You'll take part in it now, and then we'll see if your results kind of stack up with these, okay? And we get a bit of a bigger sample here. So I primed them by showing this. Think of a discussion or argument you had at work. So please do that. And we'll continue. So think back. Did it turn out that you were right? Like, did you win the discussion or the argument? Did you win it? Just think about that for a second. Now, please think back to how you felt afterwards. What was the feelings, the emotions you had after that situation? Just think about that for a second. So in my study here, there are basically two groups, those who recalled situations where they were right, those who recalled where they were wrong. When I asked the ones who were right how they felt afterwards, this was what they said. Contrast those to the ones who were wrong. Right? Good, frustrated. Satisfied, frustrated, and so on. Or good, irritated. There was a couple of negative ones here, but they revolved around people who were actually explaining they felt wrongly accused of telling or not telling the truth. So they were frustrated that they had to spend time like actually presenting evidence that they were right. They were frustrated that people just didn't believe them. There was not a single positive thing for the people who were wrong. So to me, that was eye-opening. Does this kind of go with what you felt? Thank you. All right. So why is this a problem? Well, there's a quote I love that summarizes this well. It's from Pete Hine, who is a fellow Dane. He was a famous inventor and poet. And he once said, "The road to wisdom, well, it's plain and simple to express. Air and air and air again, but less and less and less." That's how I feel about that quote. I have goosebumps every time. My dad read this to me when I was 15, and it changed my life because I was like, wow, that means I can actually learn by failing. And I think that is now the only way actually to get better at something. The only way to really become right is to be wrong a lot. That's science right there. So once you can admit to yourself that you're wrong, then you can seek out a different perspective. It's really important. I showed you, or no, I'm going to show you now. One of the favorite places I go to get a different perspective is customer success. These people are champs in my book. I get so much from them. So when I was a solo consultant, that's the first thing I was to do when I got a new client. If they had a customer success department, those are the first people I talked to. At Unbounce, they're the first people I talked to. Unbounce, we have a large CS department, and they're just 2 floors up, so it's beautiful. I can run up there, get a new perspective anytime I want to. But I'll show you a really good example of how this works. Now, it's not that these people aren't biased. They're super biased, but they're biased towards the customer, not the marketer. They're not using the marketer's lens. So I was working on our sign-up funnel at Unbounce, and we have some bullet points here. These are clearly written from the marketer's perspective. Free 30-day trial, you'll not be billed until the trial is over. It's an assumption, they're worried about that. No waiting, build a landing page right away. Your account is ready the second you signed up. People are dying to use our product. They've never used it, but they can't wait. 98% customer satisfaction rating. That's just us saying, like, we are awesome. So I sent this over to my friend Lou from CS. And I said, hey, Lou, do these look like questions people ask when you talk to them on the phone? And she goes, nope. And I go, oh, interesting. So what do they ask? And she says, she asks these 3 questions. Will I be billed during the trial? Can I cancel during my trial? Can I change plans? And I said, aha, so what do you answer when they ask these questions? She said, well, for example, I say, nope, you will only be billed after your 30-day trial. If you choose not to cancel, we will send you an email reminder near the end of the trial. We're even explaining exactly how to cancel during a trial. So being very transparent. So I actually took exactly what she told me and built a treatment based on that. We tested against the control and ran it for 2 full business cycles, 867 account signups, and a 95% significance level, and we saw an 11% increase in signups. We also had 2 record-breaking days in the week after that as far as signups. And this far down in the funnel, that's money in the bank. So in my experience, this is what happens once you start doing research. And I can't do my work without it. I refuse to, because I feel naked and kind of stupid going in there if I'm just trying to assume a lot of stuff. Because I've had a lot of bad experiences with that. I found out I was wrong so many times. So it's really about challenging your beliefs, right? Pounding them with a baseball bat and really like trying to figure out why you believe this, challenging and figuring out new ways to do it. The best information is not in just confirming you're right all the time. It's in figuring out you were wrong. I've had several people call me out in my career, and it's the best thing that ever happened. It's almost like my ego gets too big, and karma is like, Zah! You know, I'm like, oh, and then I build myself up again. And every time I have to build myself up again, I become a better version of myself, and I learn something. The first time it happened, I went through all the stages of grief, right? You start with like denial. How dare you? Don't you know who I think I am? Anger. How dare you say I'm wrong? Oh, no. And then you get kind of into the negotiation thing. Oh, if only I hadn't had that. I should have said this. I should have said that. Then you become depressed. I'm worthless. Oh, I should just quit my job. Oh, I'm going to become a janitor instead. And then you start accepting and go, yeah, he was right. I got to learn this stuff. It's a beautiful thing. Step 3 is to break the confirmation bias cycle. I showed you before. So for me, a good way of making confirmation bias less intimidating is by thinking of it as a really bad habit. So the good thing about habits is you can actually change them if you start to understand them. So I've been reading up on psychology around habits for a while, and I recommend this book. It's really good. It's written by a journalist, which is not a good sign necessarily when it's about psychology or science. but he did a really good job of actually building off a lot of theory and actually distilling it into something that makes sense. So one of the things that I took away from that was the habit loop he talks about here, which is basically that there's a cue that sets off a routine, and then that routine triggers a reward. And when the brain figures out, hey, it works, I got a reward, based on that routine, it says, let's do it again. It works. So the cue is the trigger that sets off the habit. The routine is the action triggered by the habit. And then the reward reinforces the habit and tells the brain, yep, you should keep doing this. The problem is the brain doesn't really understand the difference between a good and a bad habit. It just tries to automate it to save energy. So for example, the cue might be I feel tired. The routine is I drink Red Bull. And the reward is I feel awake. And the brain goes, awesome, let's keep doing this. It works so well. Problem is Red Bull is not super healthy for you, so maybe you want to change that habit. So the way you do that is you understand the habit loop, right? So these are obviously difficult to figure out. Sometimes the reward can be difficult to figure out. It's pretty easy here. And the routine is pretty easy to figure out. And then you can start to hack it once you become aware of these things. So maybe then you say, I feel tired. I'll try to change my routine. I'll drink green tea, and I'll see if I can get the same reward. Sometimes you have to also change the reward. Then it gets a little bit more difficult. But my hypothesis is that this is a little bit easier, actually, with confirmation bias, because I believe we already understand the loop. We understand the cue. We understand the routine. We understand the reward. It could work a little bit like this. I see some information I don't agree with, and then my routine is to reject it. And the reward is, I maintain my worldview. I didn't have to go through the pain of feeling wrong and actually changing my mind about something. Or you see info you agree with, you accept it at face value, and you maintain your worldview. So the way I suggest you try to work with this, what I'm trying to do right now is, here we go, is to change the routine. So I see some info, for example, I agree with. Then I try to say instead of just going with it, then I go, no, I could be wrong. And then I do a little bit of research. Sometimes that's only a few minutes. And maybe I still can maintain my reward of having the same worldview, because I might be right. But there's a secondary reward also, and that's new insight. I love learning new stuff. So this is a great reward anyways. So doing it like this just makes it a lot less intimidating, and it gives you a framework for actually countering it. And obviously the same thing if you see info you don't agree with, then you say, well, I could be wrong, and you do some research. Okay, I'm going to reveal something to you that's kind of embarrassing. I'm going to talk about one of the rewards I've kind of taught myself to give myself. I hear a voice inside my head. And the voice gives me compliments and says, yeah, you did good. And the voice comes from what I see as the most righteous creature in the universe. Very, very clever, an idol of mine. I'll try to do the voice. I haven't done it before. It's always in my head. Okay, here we go. Very strong. The force is in you, young Padawan. Much bias you have overcome. A true CRO master you will become. And so those are, thank you. I'm available for children's parties too. I won't talk about confirmation bias though. So those are my Yoda moments. I feel proud, I feel really good. That's an enormous reward for me. Problem is, most days I basically just hear Chewie. I have no clue what he's trying to tell me. It's just fuzzy. Those are most of my days. So let's summarize how to get rid, or at least reduce your confirmation bias problems. Accept the fact you could be wrong. Err and err and err again, but less and less and less. Seek out a different perspective and challenge your beliefs. And break the confirmation bias cycle. So we're almost done. I've told you about confirmation bias. I've shown you some pitfalls, how it can be really bad for marketers. Talked about some suggestions for how you can overcome it and thus become a better marketer. Start to see what's really going on. I want to leave you with two things, like the golden nuggets, okay? One, strive to have as many Yoda days as possible. And 2, don't blow smoke up your ass. Or anyone else's. Thank you very much.